But this time there were huge injuries, so children with their knee blown off, with half the hand missing, with a foot blown off. It was really quite devastating injuries. This was the first time that our colleagues said to us that they would rather be dead than carry on going. And that's quite hard to hear from your colleagues that you're working alongside. And she turned round to me and she looked me in the eye and she just said, "Why would anyone want to go to Gaza?"
Okay, welcome to a very special edition of the Politics of Podcast. Joining us, we have a very special guest, Dr. Victoria Rose, who I could talk about for the entirety of the episode, your credentials, but I won't. Most recently, you have been doing quite a few interviews and public discussions because you've returned from Gaza, I think in May 2025 was your last trip. So you're a NHS surgeon, and you've done 3 humanitarian visits, medical visits to Gaza, if I'm not wrong, 2 in 2024 and 1 in 2025 in May.
Yeah.
With Ideals charity, if I'm not wrong. So I really want to talk about your experiences in Gaza, what you saw, those sorts of experiences, and to give the viewers a little bit of a sense of what that was like. But before we get into that, I want to know, why did you become a doctor?
Because I had a crush on my GP when I was little.
No way. Okay, this is good stuff. All right. That's good stuff.
Well, it sounds a bit weird to say a crush, but he was a really old style GP. He was an Indian guy, and he was one of those GPs that didn't just look after you when you were sick. He sorted out every single issue that my family had.
Nice.
And he became a bit of a hero for me because he could fix anything that was happening.
Yeah.
And I woke up one morning and I think my mum asked me what I was going to do, and I said I wanted to be like Mike. His name was Mike Jolly. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. And then as soon as a child says they want to be a doctor, your mother runs with that.
Yeah. My mum still wishes that. There's enough time for me to become a doctor. Yeah, but that's interesting because I guess that's we don't really have that anymore, where your sort of physician is part of the family.
Yeah, I mean, my mum worked for him as well, which I think is why he was, so important in my life as a child. But he was just such a lovely guy, and not only made me better when I was sick, but was a real sort of, I suppose, almost like that psychological support for the family when I went through bad times. And he did just fix everything, and I really wanted to be like that when I was little.
Yeah, but it wasn't a phase for you, so you actually
no,
became a doctor.
it actually sort of the more it went along, the more I wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there I was. And it's interesting because when I was interviewed for medical school in 1980 something or other, I remember sitting in the interviewer's office, and one of the things I said I wanted to do was humanitarian work. And then I never did any until I met Graham and started working with Ideals in 2018.
Okay, yeah.
So it took me a long time to come back to what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and you specialised in
plastic surgery, yeah.
Right. Which I guess is really...
Yeah, everyone thinks it's tits and bums, but actually it's not. It's rebuilding people who have been sort of destroyed by trauma or cancer resections. It's that sort of thing. Yeah. And we do all burns management and a lot of congenital deformities, like congenital hand deformities and cleft lip and palate. Mm-hmm. So it's a very broad specialty, but it gives you lots of good skills, particularly in a war zone.
Yes, yeah. And so you met Graham in 2018 from Ideals, and that was your entry point into humanitarian work? No?
I met Graham in 2013. I was working in Manchester at the time, and I came down to take a job in London, and part of the job was to lead plastic surgery trauma at King's College London, or King's College Hospital. And Graham was one of the orthopaedic surgeons there, and he was involved in the charity called Ideals. And they were already going to Gaza at that stage. They'd been going since 2009, but really they'd been going regularly since the Great March of Return in 2018. And that's when they started to go almost every other month for a week. And I got involved when I was working with him at King's.
What was the first inspiration to... Was it more that you wanted to do humanitarian work, or was it Gaza that pulled you in?
Neither. It was that I didn't think what was going on was good enough, and I thought I could offer them something better than they had. And I think that's been a real driver for me. If I see that care is not as good as it could be, then I'm very driven to.
But
do
it takes.
something
I
about
think it takes a level of bravery, but also a part of your personality that goes, something's wrong, I'm going to fix it, right? Because
I think that's it.
humanitarian work also includes, it sounds nice, but it's a lot of danger, right? So it takes a special person, I think, to go, I'm going to risk my life to do it.
I suppose when we started, I never thought I was risking my life. I just thought that there was something that I could definitely fix, and I definitely could add something to the team. And that was what made me go. I'd been listening to them talking to the orthopaedic team in Gaza every other month on a video link. We weren't using Zoom then, but they were doing a video link, and some of the cases that were being discussed and some of the answers that were being given were not ideal. And I said to Graham, you really do need a plastic surgeon that can do this, this and this. I think I should come with you next time you go. And that's how it started.
You saw not just as I'm a doctor, I can help, but my specific field, I can plug a gap here. So I'm guessing you're the type of person that goes, there's a problem, if I can fix it, I have to fix it, right? There's something I have to do. Okay, so in 2024 was your first, you actually went to Gaza?
2019 was the first time I went to Gaza.
That's the first time.
Yeah, so I went a couple of times before the war, just on a week's mission, and we were doing set operations. So we would go on a Thursday night, and we would arrive on the Friday, and obviously Friday's Saturday in the Middle East. So we would spend Friday sort of travelling to Gaza. We'd fly into Tel Aviv, stay the night in Tel Aviv, and then Friday would be crossing through Erez border in the north, and then driving to whichever hospital we'd agreed to go to. And then we would start a clinic on Saturday morning. We'd do 2 days of clinic, Saturday, Sunday, and then we would operate Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on Thursday we'd do a ward round, and then we would leave and fly out, leave through Erez and fly out again through Ben Gurion. Right. And that was our sort of ritual.
Yeah. So talk to me the first time you went into Gaza. What did you describe? What you saw, what it was like. This is pre-2023, after the war started in 2023. But obviously Gaza has experienced war, airstrikes, famine, blockades, sieges for decades. So what's the first thing you see you cross the border? What sort of
Well,
feel
the first thing
get?
that strikes you is it is a prison, and it is like entering one of, His Majesty's prisons in the UK. There's so many locked gates and doors and x-ray machines, and you can only come in and out at certain points. And that was the first thing that's really noticeable. These people are living in
famously called an open-air prison.
in an area that they cannot get out of without specific permits and permissions. And that was really striking, and the number of armed guards around those entry points was striking. Then once you get into Gaza, the poverty...
How did they treat you, by the way, when you went through the border?
The first time, there's a lot of questioning from the Israelis as to why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this? And one of the things that they used to do to us frequently was try and delay us at the airport on our way out. So we would have a mad dash to try and make a flight in the evening on that Thursday night. And we would come out of Erez and we would routinely be held up. One of us would be held up for an extortionate amount of time, hours, 3 hours, 4 hours.
Yeah, I've had friends go over and they basically say they make you regret ever wanting to come back. Yeah.
And so we would have that hold up, but we knew we would have that hold up, so we would always book the last flight out of Ben Gurion.
You'd build it into your plans. Yeah.
And we'd always try and leave very early in the morning on the Thursday. But once you made it through Erez, there would be a dash to the airport, and when you got to the airport, they would hold you in a queue when they knew where you'd been. And in those days, they would stamp your passport, but they'd stamp a little piece of paper so it wasn't stamped in your passport.
Yes.
But you had to show that paper to exit. And so everybody knew where you'd been. And I remember one occasion being questioned by somebody in an IDF uniform. and she must have been 17, 18, and it was clear that she was going to delay me. And her question was, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, I've been in Gaza." And she said, "What have you been doing there?" And I said, "Well, I've been offering medical care to the Palestinians." And she turned round to me and she looked me in the eye and she just said, "Why would anyone want to go to Gaza?" And I just remember thinking how ill-informed the young Israelis were. And then as time's gone on and I've met more people, and I recently met Yuli Novak, who runs B'Tselem, who's a big human rights organisation in Israel. And she talks about the indoctrination of the Israeli children and how they are brought up at school being told that the Palestinians are evil and they're after your land and you have to take up arms against them. And you just think, if you're preaching that to 7-year-olds, how did you expect us to be in any other situation than we are now?
I mean, it's one of the really striking parts of the last 2 years has been these soldiers TikToking themselves committing war crimes or saying genocidal statements about Palestinians, and they're often 18, 19, 20 years old. They're very young.
But I think they are very indoctrinated. It's a very enclosed society, and there is an underlying aim that's been going on for a very long time, and it's almost normalised. And I think we find that those that stand out against it, particularly people like Uli, are not the norm.
So when you first went in 2019, what were the health facilities like? Because we'll get to how bad things are now, but even then they weren't great, right?
They weren't great, but the hospitals had normally been built or financed by charities or donors. So Shifa was an impressive building. It was run down and it could have done with a lick of paint and some aesthetic work, but it functioned and it had a good theatre complex. And the wards, again, could have had money spent on, new beds, new curtains, cordoning off the beds. But it could do the job. The infrastructure of it was good and it had everything it needed. And one thing that you have to understand is that the Palestinians are very well educated, and all of the doctors that we worked with were up to our standard. And the only reason that we were going in was to try and help them with kit that they weren't familiar with, because a doctor in Palestine or a doctor in Gaza can't freely leave Gaza. You have to apply for a permit if you want to leave to go out and train somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's very hard to get.
And that's very hard to get. And in the UK, all of my trainees will go abroad to foreign meetings. At least once a year they will go to Europe or America or the Middle East or Asia for a international meeting where they will learn and they will pick up new techniques. Yeah. And the Gazans were not able to do this, so they were finding themselves behind with some of the modern trauma management, and the aim that Ideals had was to go in and teach them, because we knew we couldn't get them all out.
I think one of the things that's important for our audience to know, because there's a lot of times now when they're talking about hospitals in Gaza, they talk about numbers like 17, 25, 30 hospitals. There's really 4 big ones that can manage serious trauma in the way that we're talking about. That's Shifa, Al-Aqsa,
Nasser,
and European
Gaza.
So those are... did you work in all 4?
Those were the big 4 that we concentrated in. We started in Shifa, and then we decanted to the European Gaza, mainly because Shifa is the biggest hospital and our work was semi-elective. We were dealing with gunshot wounds from previous offences.
Because that's what I was going to ask in 2019. What kind of cases were you seeing?
So after the Great March of Return, there was an extortionate number of young men that had been shot in the leg, and they were suffering with deep bone infection. And one of the mechanisms of curing that is to put what we would call a circular frame on the leg, so to excise the segment of infected bone and then either shorten it or bone transport. And that's a specific technique that we've been using in the UK and all over Europe. And that's what we were there to teach our local orthopaedic colleagues how to use. And I was there purely to support the skin side of it, so to cover any skin defects that needed covering. And that's where we started from.
So lots of gunshot wounds, lots of that sort of trauma.
Yeah, there were thousands after the Great March of Return.
Yeah, and then so you come back, and the most recent rounds of visits you've done the first one was 2024. When was it? May 2024? March 2024. Very different scenes, because now we are, what was it, 6-7 months into the war by that point.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing the first time you go in March 24?
Carnage, absolute carnage. I mean, the most striking thing when we first went back in was the destruction and the number of buildings that had been bombed. And we knew that the south hadn't been hit as hard as the north. But the drive in, there was a lot of rubble. People were still managing some semblance of daily life. There were people on the streets, there was still food available, but we had a lot of internally displaced people from the north, so many families had been pushed down already. And when we arrived at the European Gaza hospital, it was absolutely packed. It wasn't a hospital, it was almost like a camp, like a refugee camp. People had pitched tents outside on the grounds, but also inside. People had cordoned off sections of the corridors with sheets and carpets. There were mattresses on the floor, and families were living there in the corridors. And that was really shocking to see, the number of people that were taking refuge in a hospital.
Yeah, and so the Shifa Hospital, for example, or the Nasser Hospital, which previously you said, was managing, was able to deal with a lot of these trauma, is now under intense pressure, and struggling to deal with the cases. What kind of cases are you seeing this time? So previously lots of gunshot wounds. Is it very similar, or?
The last trip in May was very different initially, because most of the wounds that we saw were from blast injuries. We saw a lot of burns from the actual heat of the explosion or the fire of the explosion. But we saw a lot of deep penetrating wounds and a lot of bits of people that had almost been blown off. So there's lots of ways that you can be injured in a blast. The first one is that initial sound wave, or that pressure that comes out when the explosion is released. And that can do things like perforate an eardrum, rupture a lung, or cause internal bleeding. But then you have the actual force of that. If it picks you up and throws you against something, that can cause blunt trauma, head injury. And then you have the injuries that are caused by shrapnel. So anything around you in the explosion is ejected at a really high force. And that hits you and penetrates. And that will break an underlying bone, penetrate the abdomen, lung, head. So causing quite significant injuries. And what we noticed in the march was that the injuries were very large. So previously we'd seen smaller injuries, as if from smaller parts of shrapnel, people maybe further away from the blast. But this time there were huge injuries. So children with their knee blown off, with half the hand missing, with a foot blown off. It was really quite devastating injuries.
So is the view then that this isn't collateral, but they're being hit by the initial blast? So
I think there's lots of reasons for it, but I think there is definitely indiscriminate bombing. Then there's definitely no collateral. We see entire families that have been bombed. But also by the March, or by the May, and that was something that we noticed in the August, there is no infrastructure in Gaza now. No buildings are standing. So everyone is living in a tent. And in the May...
So if you stand on a roof and you look out at the horizon, there's no buildings.
There's virtually nothing to see. And so by the May, people were being bombed in tents. And that was very different from the scenario that we'd heard in the March and even in the August when we were there. There were lots of mass casualties from tank firing at tents.
And so you're looking at... I want to specifically ask about the children. What kind of things are you seeing come in throughout? So is it...
A huge number of children, really small children, quite a real preponderancy for kids around the age of sort of 7, 8, 9, that kind of group. a lot of burn injuries and big burns. So we had a lot of really small kids, we had a 3-month-old with really large burns, very significant burns for somebody of that small, and very deep burns. That was probably about 30% of the children's injuries. And then the rest of them bits of them had been blown off. And that was quite shocking to see.
And how are you handling that? Because at this point now, of the hospitals, most of the hospitals have been destroyed or are functioning on a real emergency basis. So the treating the most urgent things. How is the hospital coping by the most recent one, for example, May 25, I think it was?
I think they're coping really well, and that just goes to show you how adaptable and how good the healthcare workers are in Gaza. They were very good at triaging patients and making sure that patients were distributed amongst the surgeons, in the most, effective way. So there was a very constant stream of patients that I was asked to see. And I think that sort of focuses you on the job at hand, that doesn't really give you time to think about the situation and what's actually happening to the population, because every time you finish a case, there's another patient that needs you and somebody else requesting you to see someone. We struggled at NASA. Obviously, we struggled at NASA this time with equipment. We were very short of essential items, and we'd gone beyond the scrap heap challenge stage that we were in August, where we were making do with what we had and repurposing things. This time we were out of many things. The most serious of all was analgesia. We had very little painkiller, and that was quite difficult because it meant that everybody was in pain after their surgery.
Because a lot of the reports that we're getting are surgeries performed without anesthesia, surgeries performed with very little pain meds, and then post-surgical very little pain meds. So people are, that's happening.
That's happening. Yeah. That's happening. And
so is that also on kids? Like, you're performing surgeries without anesthesia on kids?
We don't perform without, but we will always try with sedation before we would give a general anaesthetic, because we don't have enough of those agents. So most of the children we would try with ketamine, and if we could do what we needed, we would continue down that route. We would only really intubate, so fully take over control of breathing for someone, if we knew that the procedure would take, more than 30, 40 minutes.
Because you're just so scarce on resources.
Because we're scarce, that we didn't have enough of anything. We didn't even have enough of the laryngeal masks or the endotracheal tubes that you use to take over someone's breathing, and they were all re-sterilised. In the UK, those are single-use items.
Oh, and then you throw them out, but you
throw them out.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Can I ask? This might be. Forgive me if this is a sensitive question for you, but of the patients that you were seeing, how many died that you ordinarily would be able to save because of scarcity of resources or things like that? Because I want to get a sense of. I know the doctors are doing amazingly well under the conditions, but are people who should be living dying because of the attacks on hospitals?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We had very limited antibiotic options. We only had 3, and they were very basic, and none of them would have been your first choice in these sorts of wounds. So we had 2 children under the age of 10 die on us from overwhelming sepsis, which would have been totally avoidable. We had a child die from their burns, which again possibly could have been avoidable in the UK. But I think rather than children die, a lot of amputations were performed that wouldn't have been performed in the UK, because the situation would not have deteriorated in the way that it did in Gaza. In the UK, we would have been able to take those children and get those wounds clean and give them adequate antibiotics and adequate support
to save the limbs,
so that they showed signs of healing, and that we could start with the reconstruction. Because of the malnutrition, the lack of supplies, the lack of antibiotics, it was a constant battle to see any sign of healing in the children, and to get rid of any contamination in the wounds and fight any infection was impossible. And so a lot of the time, the only sort of sensible choice, and the only way that you could ensure that you would get somebody out of the hospital, would be if you performed an amputation.
So you're looking at a whole generation of kids where a large proportion have some form of amputation
Yeah.
as a result.
Highest number of amputees in the world.
So what's also happened is not just the patients coming in because they've been attacked, but the hospitals themselves being attacked, which is, of course, a war crime under international law. A lot of these hospitals are no longer functioning. What did you all see, but also what were you hearing? Because a lot of these are your colleagues who are working in multiple facilities. How are the hospitals being targeted and attacked?
Well, the hospitals are clearly being targeted and attacked because they're never more than two functioning at any, or never more than two of the big four were functioning at any time when we were there. Constantly, one was either being bombed or evacuated. And when we went in the May, the European Gaza was bombed while our colleagues were there. So there was never any concern about the safety or the welfare of doctors or even international doctors.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely a campaign to state that the hospital was a Hamas headquarters, I think is the aim, and then take it out of commission is the next aim.
That is the picture, at least to the British audience and the world really. The view that the Israelis would like us to see is that these hospitals are command and control centres for terrorism. Did you see any of that at all?
No, I didn't see any of that. I didn't see any tunnels in any of the hospitals that I worked in, and I certainly didn't see any Hamas soldiers running any form of insurgents or counterattack from any part of the hospital. And I often say, I was working a lot of the time and I probably don't know what Hamas looked like, but I did walk around the hospital every day on a ward round. I did go to multiple different areas to see patients, and I never saw anything like that. But I think it's the story that Israel put out because it's useful in that it will allow you to target the hospitals. If you continually refer to the healthcare sector in Gaza as the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, it gives a picture that I'm working with doctors who have got AK-47s on their back, and it really taints the public's opinion of the healthcare workers in Gaza. But not only that, it almost gives Israel carte blanche to bomb them because they've convinced you that they're all Hamas. And that's not what we saw. That's not what we saw.
And not in essence, totally defaming your colleagues who are risking their lives to help people.
I think of it as similar to the situation you'd find if you started referring to doctors in the UK as Labour's, I'm Labour's plastic surgeon. And I am a plastic surgeon irrespective of who the government is.
Well, it would have been like saying during COVID when the NHS said 20,000 people died, it would have been like running the headline 20,000 people dead says Conservative run healthcare service.
But I think that's what you need to think, is that all of the doctors in Gaza will be doctors in Gaza, irrespective of whether Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, or whoever is in. Mm-hmm. You train to be a doctor and you don't stop being a doctor just because a government gets in.
Did you ever see any Palestinian armed groups while you were there?
No, we didn't. It's difficult because obviously I don't know what Hamas looks like. But
walking around with guns.
No, I never saw anyone with guns. And that was one of the things that made it very difficult to accept that the Gaza and Humanitarian Foundation shootings were being run by local Palestinian gangs, because we certainly didn't see the local Palestinian gangs, and none of them came into hospital while I was there with gunshot wounds.
Because, even early on specifically, I remember there were very serious allegations that missiles were being shot out of these hospitals or from the car parks or from that stuff that you will have seen. If there's missile factories or missiles being shot from hospital, you would have seen that out the window or walking in. You didn't see any of that?
No, just bombing in the background.
Can I ask, a lot of people have died. How are they dealing with, the morgues, that sort of service? Because I can only imagine, lots of dead bodies piling up.
There's lots of mass graves, and it's quite upsetting to see. They cleared the back of Nasser Hospital with the intention of trying to erect a Medania, a field hospital, so that we could increase the capacity of the wards, and they uncovered a huge mass grave that had obviously been dug during Nasser's evacuation or occupation in the March of 2024.
Did you at any point think your life was in danger while you were out there? Or were you so busy you don't even have time to think about that because you're going one patient to the next?
I think you're so busy you don't think about it, and it doesn't really help if you start thinking about that. I think we discussed it, we always discuss it. I discussed it with my family before I went.
Because it's a real possibility.
Yeah, but nobody twisted my arm. Nobody told me that it was going to be a theme park. I knew.
Yeah, you know what you were.
I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I was getting into. In the back of my mind, I did think that it would be a poorly judged move to blow up Nasser when so many international doctors were there, but that wasn't my rationale for going there.
Because one of the reasons why your testimony is so important is because international journalists aren't being allowed into Gaza at all. So you're one of the few actual eyes and ears that have come back, really.
But local journalists are in. Yes, I was filmed constantly when I was there by two fantastic cinematographers, Mazen Bream and Amma Tabir, who are on Instagram. If anyone's interested, you should follow them. They take incredible footage.
What was it? Can we give a shout out there?
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Mazen Bream and Amma Tabir.
Okay, we'll try and find their links and stick it in.
Yeah, you should stick them in. They both do a lot of work in and around Nasser, a lot of filming, and they're always on the ground. They both film me for various outlets, various news outlets, international news outlets, and there are people that are depicting it. But I think, again, the narrative's controlled, and the feeling is that anything produced by a Palestinian has been in some way manipulated and isn't true.
Well, everything's Hamas, isn't it? We've got a BBC documentary that was pulled because the child was related to someone. A child, by international law definitions, can't be a combatant or be a member of a terrorist organisation. The Hamas-run health ministry, for example, the hospitals are Hamas, the schools are Hamas. So it's very difficult for members of the public who aren't, who are getting their news from the mainstream sites, for example, to discern
it's very difficult.
What is and isn't true.
But they are putting out the truth.
Yeah.
What you're saying, and I don't think anybody in Gaza now has the facilities to mock up some sort of AI facility or, it is what those two guys show is what I saw.
Well, but we've also seen more journalists killed in the last year in Gaza than at, I think, any point in my lifetime, certainly, in terms of Palestinian journalists. I presume you still have colleagues there.
Yeah.
What are they saying to you most recently? Is it much of the same since
I think they're all concerned about the plan now that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is going to set up a camp at Rafah and only distribute food if you enter the camp, which is what they said at the beginning of this journey, and why the United Nations and all its partners refused to work with them. But to see that now in print in Israeli newspapers is quite shocking, and I think my colleagues are worried about what is going to happen. Food is still very, very scarce in Gaza.
Yeah, these aid centres, for example, at the time of filming this, I think 800 people have been shot and killed at distribution points. Recently, the Israelis bombed a water distribution point where children died, queuing for water because they can't get water because there's no fuel for the sanitation. I want to ask you lastly about that before we wrap up and talk about the general mood of Gaza, which I'm interested to hear. We've seen a lot of videos and pictures and things of children with bullet wounds, some sniper wounds to the head. Did you see that sort of thing, children with bullet wounds?
Yeah, I saw that more in the March. I think we left Gaza this time on the 4th of June, so there'd only been 3, I think, GHF shootings when we left.
Mm-hmm.
But I have heard from my colleagues that children are being shot. Initially, it seemed that the men were going to collect the aid, because it was deemed safer for the women to stay with the children. And then after the shootings, I think there was a feeling that the GHF wouldn't shoot women and children, and that's now been proven wrong. So they are shooting women and children at the distribution points.
I want to ask you about the mood of Gaza, because you've been over multiple years. You've got colleagues, friends there.
Yeah.
I've got lots of, Palestinian friends, many of whom's families are back there. We've sort of FaceTimed when we can. Palestinians are remarkably, especially in Gaza, resilient people. Is that wearing thin now?
I think it's completely gone. This was the first time that our colleagues said to us that they would rather be dead than carry on going. And that's quite hard to hear from your colleagues that you're working alongside. There's also now a lot of people making desperate attempts to leave Gaza, which is, again, very sad, because ultimately that is Israel's aim.
And it says a lot, because Palestinians are very keen not to be kicked out of their own country.
Yeah, very keen.
So it must have reached a specific...
But it has reached a point now where I think they know if they stay they will die. And a lot of people with young families, don't want to see that happen to their children.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go back? Is that your intention?
Well, yeah, I would like to go back, because there's so much work to do. So I feel a responsibility to go back.
And who makes the decision on whether you're allowed to go back or not?
So the final decision is made by COGAT, who are the coordination of activities in the occupied Palestinian territories. So they're a branch of the IDF, or more correctly, the IOF. And they get the final say.
Oh, so they determine whether doctors can come. So
the WHO and the United Nations grant you a seat on the convoy in about 2 weeks before the convoy leaves. They'll firm that up with you.
Mm-hmm.
But COGAT will give you approval the night before as to whether you get in or not.
But lots of doctors aren't being allowed in, right?
No, and we got denied entry when we went in February of this year. 4 of us tried to get in mid-February this year, and we got denied entry.
What can our audience do? If you've gone and asked from them, I mean, you've bravely done more than almost anyone else can do. But if they're watching and listening, what do you think what would be your call for them in terms of how they can contribute to ending this?
I think the real tangible thing that we could do is start a movement to stop the Gazan Humanitarian Fund, because it is not a humanitarian fund, and that's not a political movement to ask for them to be removed and for the distribution of aid to be conducted by organisations with a track record that have the ability to get aid into Gaza at scale through multiple points, and not just food. We need water, fuel, sanitation, vaccination programs need to restart. So I think that's a very tangible thing that we could get behind. I know people are sick of writing to their MPs, but if that was a campaign, it's very apolitical, it's very humanitarian. Those people deserve aid, they deserve safe aid. And that's not what they're getting from this company. And this company is not an independent company. It's an Israeli-American run company that is not impartial, and it's shown that it is unable to deliver aid. No other humanitarian company has ever caused this many deaths whilst distributing aid to a population. And for that reason alone, there needs to be pressure on America and Israel to withdraw and to let agencies that know what they're doing back into Gaza.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You are, in my eyes, an absolute hero, because, I mean, doctors are heroes anyway in this country, I think, given the circumstances of pay and resources. But to travel halfway across the world into a war zone to help people, I think, I mean, I've got a Superman little statue here because I'm big into my superheroes, but you're a real life version, as are your colleagues, particularly the Palestinian ones who don't have the option
of leaving.
They have to continue, and I think you've very articulately put where their mind is at. So I want to, on behalf of our audience, and I think everyone in Britain, thank you for everything that you've done. I hope, I hope some of these stories that you can convey hit hard with people, because these are the realities that are being lived by your colleagues and your friends and Palestinians on the ground.
I think we just need to remember that we're not going to get a quick fix to this. Everybody thinks we're that, we are that instant generation that wants instant gratification. I think a lot of people feel that they've been fighting this for so long and it's not happening, that they're losing energy, they're becoming despondent. But apartheid didn't happen in 2 years, and we're not at 2 years yet. This is going to take a long time, and you cannot lose momentum here. And I would strongly urge people not to lose momentum. We need to keep going. We need to keep the pressure up, because it's the only way that we are going to get a satisfactory outcome to this situation.
Yeah, and that's the only thing. In Britain, we've certainly seen a significant shift in public opinion.
There has been, and you need to take some solace from that and keep going.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you for listening. We're going to put Dr. Rose's socials and all her information in the description below, so you can follow your journey if you're able to go back, but also I'm sure you're going to be sharing and promoting the work of colleagues, journalists and doctors. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. We've got lots more really interesting, moving interviews and content coming your way. So like, subscribe, leave a comment. I'm sure Dr. Rose will see it as well, and we'll see you on the next one.